Jai Guru, everyone.
Hey Guru, welcome to the next episode of Yogananda podcast. We're going through the autobiography of a yogi line by line. We got Lauren and Priyank here today. How are you guys doing?
Good, thank you.
Well, thanks.
That's great. So great. So we are still in chapter 21. We visit Kashmir, and it's the last episode of it. So 21.4. And before we go right into it, Priyank, do you want to tell us what happened in the last episode?
Yeah, so last episode we just talked briefly about the different complexions of the people in India and the genealogy and the scientific studies that have recently come about that. We've talked about the Mukunda's asking Sri Yukteswar not to leave his physical form, and Sri Yukteswar heeding to that, like a divine intercession, but from a devotee to a guru. And then we talked about the Christ-like life of Sri Yukteswar in terms of his healing, guru's healing, and taking the sins and karma of his devotees, just like Christ. And then I love this line in the last section, which was, by a secret yogic method, the saint unites his mind and astral vehicle with those of a suffering individual. The disease is conveyed, wholly or in part, to the yogi's fleshly form. Just thought it was
Beautiful.
a really good scientific explanation about how Christ and the others take on the sins.
Yeah, because Christ wouldn't have had the karma to be crucified. He was suffering for his followers. And Sri Yukteswar is doing the same. He's taking on karma of his followers and then works them out on his own body, which is a beautiful, selfless thing that a lot of saints are doing. And then Guruji talks a little bit about, he explains that only a self-realized master can transfer his life force to convey onto his own body the disease of others. And I'm guessing that's probably for the best, because otherwise we might bite off more than we can chew. And he also says that it's not desirable for an ordinary man to do so. Sometimes it might be something that we feel like we want to do. We want to help someone else, but it is the kind of prerogative of self-realized masters to do that. And I'm guessing they would also be more capable of then working out this karma, because they can burn it in Kriya. And also, we talked about this last time with Christ, that even though he was outwardly suffering, inwardly he was with God. So he wasn't really, his soul wasn't suffering. Right. Then Guruji says that it's important to have a body in good condition, because otherwise it's hard to maintain concentration in meditation. So one of the things a yogi has to do is keep his body in as good condition as possible if he wants to make spiritual progress. So a healthy body is important for spiritual progress. And then he says that if you have a very strong mind, you can make spiritual progress even with an unhealthy body. It's very difficult. He mentions the story of saints in the next paragraphs. Yes, Priyank?
I like in the previous line about how the mind is unable to remain fixed in devotional concentration if it's not kept in good condition. And like a lot of people like give their life and soul to their work or their family or their friends or their community, and then if their body suffers for it, or if they're so tired that they can't meditate, then it kind of feels like you're doing too much, especially with this line, because it's imperative that we should maintain our body and mind so it's not a hindrance in meditation, as Guruji says. And this whole line about fixed in devotional concentration is a good description for our Kriya plus devotion equation of what we should be practicing. But overall, I think this line re-emphasizes how important this human birth is and how we need to make the most of it for our liberation, and then our liberation also then means that we're doing the best service that we can to humanity, as Guruji says.
Yeah. I do also love, though, that he then follows on to say that, if you've got a strong mind, you can transcend any physical difficulties. And it gives people who may be going through something that's karmic, or something that they, maybe they have an illness or something that they're going through, it still gives them hope. And I love that about Guruji. He's always giving us the truth, but always saying, well, there's another reality that you can go into no matter what your circumstances are. And I find it very uplifting.
Yeah, 100%. Because otherwise, if you would find yourself in a bad physical condition, you would lose hope. But there's never a reason to lose hope. There's always something you can do.
Yeah.
There's that story where Guruji had cholera when he was a kid, and he wasn't strong enough to bow before Lahiri Mahashai's picture, and so he did it mentally, and that did it for him. So, and there's many other stories like that. So one example that Guruji gives here is, before that, Priyank?
Yeah, the example you were probably going to, the line, many saints have ignored the illness, ignored illnesses and succeeded in their divine quest. There's a really cool line in chapter 12 where Yukteswar says, imagination is the door through which disease as well as healing enters. Disbelieve in the reality of sickness. Even when you are ill, an unrecognized visitor will flee. So I feel like these saints are employing this counsel, through Yukteswar counsel, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Well, definitely knowingly, actually, but not with this specific line, probably.
Yeah.
I had something like that recently, where it was last week. I could feel a cold coming on. But the thing is, I had to come back and visit my parents because my mum needed looking after because she wasn't very well. And I said, well, no, I cannot be ill. There is no room for it. It's not happening. And it just kind of, went away after a couple of days. And I think there's a lot to be said for the mind. You really can oust it out sometimes. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes you have to go through these things. But yeah, I kind of had a little moment the other day. I thought, oh, yeah, thank you.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Has it ever happened to you guys that you were very focused on work and you were fine and everything, and then suddenly vacation starts or you have a few days off or something, and then you let go, and then suddenly you become sick?
All the time.
It's before.
Yeah. But this time, because I had the week off, I was like, no, no, it's not allowed. It's not happening.
We have no time for this.
Yeah.
I find that ever since I took energization really, really seriously, like my quantity of sick days has gone really drastically down. I'm talking like over 90%. And even when I'm ill, I don't get knocked out. It's generally manageable. So I find Guruji's teachings of, people say, I don't have time for meditation, or, in Lauren's case, she didn't have that specific time to be sick because she had greater duties. But then if you invest your time in things like energization or Guruji's teachings, on scientific healing affirmations, which probably take a little bit of investment, but like with all good investments, the return is greater than the initial outlay.
Absolutely. That reminds me, my sister interviewed a devotee from the New York Center, and he said he was in pretty poor health. He was elderly now, but before he said when he came onto the path, he had problems with health, And then he started doing de-energization exercises, not just twice a day, but like 20 times a day or 30 times per day. And that became kind of his routine. And he said he saw great improvement in his health.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first saint that Guruji mentions is Saint Francis of Assisi, who, as we heard, has I think he was the one who authored the what is it called, the poem God God God, and told it to Guruji in meditation. So he had really, like, if you read about his life, he had a lot of health problems, especially in the later years. I think he was completely blind at some point, but he was still healing. He was still performing miracles and healing other people. So he wasn't so bothered with his own body. He was helping his followers. And the next story that Guruji says here is very beautiful. It's like he says, he calls him an Indian saint, and he says that in his early life he had severe diabetes, and he had sores all over his body, but that didn't stop him from making a spiritual effort. So he went and he prayed, and his prayer is very beautiful. He says, "Lord, wilt thou come into my broken temple?" And he said it was he said, with ceaseless command of will, the saint had gradually become able to sit in the lotus posture daily for 8 hours. I mean, who of us can do that?
18.
Is it 18? Sorry.
Yeah.
18
Even
hours.
more
Who of us can do
impressive.
that? Yeah, engrossed in ecstatic trance. Yeah. So I find that remarkable. So there are examples of, even if you are severely struck by disabilities, you can still reach God, but it is harder. So the premise in the first paragraph was keep your body healthy to make spiritual progress easier. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of a healthy body, if I tried lotus posture for more than, I don't know, half an hour, and it's certainly if it was multiple hours, it says St. Francis of Assisi, like, even raised the dead, that he would have to raise the whole lower half of my body, because I think it would just be completely finished, because I would not be, it would take me probably a week to recover from that. Can you just imagine? It's such a hard posture to be able to do. He must be so supple, or like his practice of yoga must be so sound for him to be able to sit for that long.
Yes. And then having sores on your body, the pain must have been excruciating. Yeah. And then he finishes, he said, and he told me, at the end of 3 years, I found the infinite light blazing within me. Rejoicing in its splendor, I forgot the body. Later, I saw that it had become whole through the divine mercy. Amazing. And another story that Guruji tells in the next paragraph is that of King. Priyank told me before this podcast how to pronounce him, and I forgot again. Was it Babur? Babur?
Babur.
Babur.
That's it.
King Babur.
Got to imagine we're Persian.
King Babur. He lived from 1483 to 1530 and was the founder of the Mughal Empire in India. And so his son's name was Humayun. He became very ill. And so the father, what he did was he prayed to God, and it says here, with anguished determination. And he did not just pray for his son's healing, but he prayed to receive the malady of his son. So like a great master would do. So I wonder if that Guruji said earlier, only great masters can take on karma. I don't know if that is a sign that he was very spiritually advanced. It might be.
Yeah, or apparently great masters or parents with like extreme devotion allows you to not have to employ a secret yogic method, which is not open to the likes of you and I, but devotion is. And parents, I think we often hear about the healing capabilities of parents that are really in tune, like especially like Mukunda's mother. She kind of had that quality, didn't she?
Absolutely. Yeah, Guruji says that the love of a mother is what comes closest to unconditional love in this world. So, yeah, and it worked. So his son recovered, and Babur immediately fell sick and died of the same disease that has stricken his son. It's a beautiful story. And then Humayun went on to be the father of Akbar the Great, who was probably the most famous of the Mughal rulers in India. And then Guruji, in the footnote, he talks a little bit about him. He first says he had Islamic zeal and he persecuted Hindus. But then he says, as I grew in knowledge, I was overwhelmed with shame. Miracles occur in the temples of every creed. And so he came around and he translated the Bhagavad Gita into Persian, and he invited Christian Jesuit fathers from Rome. So he was trying to be more of a ruler that accepted or tolerated multiple faith. I think even more than accepting it, if he invites them to his court. So, and yeah, that is an interesting story. I didn't know that before I read this here. I knew that the Mughal rulers were Islamic, but this is a beautiful story. This is nice. Yeah, classic India. I feel like in India things like that always happen. Like people come around and get, yeah. And there's like one sentence at the end that I found beautiful. He says, "The world is a bridge passed over it, but build no house upon it." Yeah, I like that one. Yeah.
It kind of rings to like how you should live in this world but not be of it. Like don't build strong foundations or anchors on this on this plane, because we're temporary, very temporary visitors. And Akbar is he's probably the most revered of the Mughal emperors and kings, principally actually because of his conversion in the sense he became much more inclusive, as the Guruji kind of recounts here. And he became so inclusive that he had as his chief advisor a Hindu intellectual. His name was Birbal. And he's very much loved, and his stories are told throughout history, and now even present day. Currently, Akbar would refer to Birbal, and Birbal would challenge Akbar and find different ways to get through to him, and Akbar also appreciated it, and often he would cross the limit every now and then, but then Akbar would let him off. There's this really good story that Guruji also recounts about. It's called The Blind Men and the Elephant, and I'll start reading out some of it, and perhaps Lauren can finish it off. So it says, one day Emperor Akbar overheard a heated argument between religious scholars in his court. Each scholar claimed their understanding of God was the absolute truth. Akbar turned to Birbal and said, "How can we show them that no one can claim to fully understand the divine?" Birbal smiled and invited 4 blind men to the court. He then had an elephant brought in, and asked each blind man to touch a different part of the elephant and describe what they thought it was.
The first blind man, touching the elephant's leg, said, "This creature is like a thick tree trunk." The second, feeling its ear, said, "No, it's more like a large fan." The third, grasping the tail, said, "You are both wrong. It's like a rope." The fourth, touching its side, said, "You are all mistaken. It's like a great wall." Akbar smiled, seeing where Birbal was going with this. Birbal turned to the scholars and said, "Just like these men, each experienced only a part of the elephant. Different religions see different aspects of the divine. None can claim to see the full truth alone, but together they form a greater understanding." The scholars, realizing their mistake, stopped arguing and pledged to respect one another's beliefs. Lesson: Birbal brilliantly shows that no single perspective can capture the whole truth. Religious harmony comes from acknowledging that each faith holds a piece of wisdom, and that true understanding comes from mutual respect. That's lovely, isn't it?
Yeah. The one thing I like about this, from a Hindu perspective, Indian meditation perspective, is that each of the blind men can only grasp a little part of it, but should any one of them regain sight, full sight, then they'll see the whole picture. And that's obviously our purpose, isn't it? To open our eyes from this darkness of Maya and see the greater picture. And I love how related to St. Francis of Assisi, like you mentioned that he was near blind towards the end of his life, but you can almost certainly be sure that his third eye was not blind.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges of our age, that every religion and every culture has some wisdom hidden in it. And rather than saying one is better than the other, we need to try to be inclusive and bring them together. Not an easy task. Yeah, we're working on it. And the next paragraph, Guruji says that many persons believe that a great master should have the health and strength of a Sandow. And I was like, what is a Sandow? And then there's a footnote. It's a German athlete, 1925, known as the world's strongest man. And so I had to look him up. So he was a pioneer bodybuilder. He was Jewish, from Germany, from Königsberg, which is these days no longer German, but has a rich tradition. Like Immanuel Kant came from there as well, for example. And he organized the first.
Sorry, who is this Immanuel Kant?
Immanuel Kant is probably one of the most famous philosophers of the modern era.
Immanuel Kant, and I don't know him. I need to research.
You need to research Immanuel Kant.
I need to open my eyes a bit more. Yes, so he is. Yeah.
In 1901, Sandow, or probably in Germany you would say Sandow, his name was Eugen Sandow, and he organized the first bodybuilding competition in Royal Albert Hall. So when you walk by this building in London, it has seen many things over the years. It's been there for a while.
Good one.
You would think it's yeah. So the gist is that just because you look outwardly healthy and strong, that doesn't make you a master, especially not a spiritual master. Yes, Priyank?
This line really made me quite intrigued, because I've met many people that dismiss the need for God by saying that, oh, look, I don't do any meditation or yoga or watch my diet, X, Y, Z, and look how healthy I am. Look how strong-willed I am. Look how successful I am. You're just, just wasting your time with all this. And then they don't obviously realize that you don't know what's around the corner, firstly, and you don't know what was around the previous corner in terms of what led you to where you are. You just see like this finite tunnel vision, and then you can't really extract your whole life philosophy around around that. Yeah, it's a tough one to
It is.
to challenge that kind of outlook. Not challenge it, but to respond to it, I suppose.
Yeah, because if you wouldn't know any better, you would say if someone looks very sickly and is preaching about health, you would say that's a red flag. You wouldn't really listen to them, but that's really not how this works, especially if you're looking for a spiritual master, that his outward appearance doesn't really say what's inside. And then Guruji says here, proof that one is a master, however, is supplied only by the ability to enter the breathless state, sabikalpa samadhi, and by the attainment of immutable bliss, nirvikalpa samadhi. It's really hard to know if someone is in that state from the outside. I guess you also have to trust your intuition.
Isn't it almost like a breathless state as well, the nirvikalpa? So maybe we can like put a peg on that nose and imagine.
like Guruji with Yukteswar, put a mirror under his nose. Yeah. So and then he goes on and he says that the rishis have pointed out that this is how you demonstrate that you mastered Maya. And then he says his last sentence, which I like a lot. He says, he alone may say from the depth of realization, ekam sat, means only one exists. Oh, yeah.
Really, really nice ekam sat, isn't it? I feel like there's some chants, especially some Sikh chants surrounding that. But this first line in this paragraph, numerous bewildered seekers in the West erroneously think that an eloquent speaker or writer on metaphysics must be a master. I love how there's so many writers on yoga and meditation and mindfulness and the average person would then just compare a Paramahansa Yogananda to that person that's written a book on meditation, right? Have you had it in the past? Oh yeah, I read a book about this person, but this person's also good, and they do almost do a comparison, isn't it? It's crazy.
It is. Luckily, we don't have to do that. In the next paragraph, Guruji cites Shankaracharya. We talked about him a few episodes ago because actually in this same chapter, because in Srinagar they went to the Shankara temple and we learned that he's the one reorderer of the Swami order and modernizer, and so very important for the Hindu belief. And so it's going to read out what Shankara says. He says, when there is duality, because of ignorance, one sees all things as distinct from the self. When everything is known as the self, not even an atom is seen as other than the self. As soon as knowledge of the reality has sprung up, there can be no fruits of past actions to be experienced, owing to the unreality of the body, just as there can be no dream after waking.
Really powerful, isn't it? Just there can be no dream after waking. Guruji, it seems Shankaracharya loves this analogy of awaking from this dream delusion of God's creation. And Shankaracharya also loved it, and probably also other saints loved it as well. Guruji has so many cosmic chants surrounding this theme of waking, like, oh my saint, wake yet, wake. And then night has flown, dawn has come. Wake, my children, wake. And then there's the more somber, from this sleep, what will you wake me? So yeah, all these surrounding similar themes, isn't it? That Guruji has taken these really profound concepts from people, from sages and saints like Shankaracharya, and made them into, or imbibed them into our, spiritualized them into our cosmic chants.
Yeah, they're both very beautiful, those chants. So Guruji goes on. He says that Yukteswar was able to take on all this karma from his followers and work it out this way because the spirit within him gave him permission. So this was all part of a divine plan. This was also not just Sri Yukteswar doing it. And funny that he when Guruji mentions this, he also mentions Srinagar, and Srinagar is where Sri Yukteswar started having those kind of this kind of illness. And there's a footnote about Srinagar.
Before we do that,
oh yeah, okay.
I just had a point about this, about how Sri Yukteswar wouldn't have suffered, i.e., for his devotees, unless he had received the divine to receive permission from the spirit within him to help his disciples in this strange way. And I wonder what form this permission kind of took, because you can't really imagine Sri Yukteswar having a conversation with God saying, will you permit me to heal this person? I imagine more that he's just in sync with the divine plan. So he's not doing anything that is against the divine plan. So he's got the permission kind of automatically. And or an alternative view could be like, he was essentially, the plan was for him to pass, right? But Mukunda asked him very directly and told him, you need to please, don't, I can't live without you, essentially, and we've got work to do. So then he has to then ask God if the plan can be altered. Maybe that could be a kind of permission. I don't know.
Yeah. I wish I would have been there when he talked to God. And yeah, let's go into this Srinagar footnote, where we were in Srinagar a few pages ago, but now Guruji goes into a bit of detail about the city, like that it's the capital of Kashmir, and it was founded in the 3rd century by Emperor Asoka. So I think Emperor Asoka is a name that everyone has heard, is pretty famous. I wasn't clear that Asoka was one of the biggest promoters of Buddhism in the region, in India and in other places. He says here he built 500 monasteries, of which 100 are still standing.
According to historians, especially Dalrymple, he says that when Buddhism came about and Buddha passed, he obviously had a group, he had disciples, but it didn't spread like you'd just imagine it to spread. You just imagine Buddha to be alive and everyone to flock to his teachings, right, all over Asia and East Asia. But what happened was, like, for 200 years, it stayed very, very small, exceptionally small. And as soon as Ashoka employed it and made that the religion of the state, and then sent missionaries around all of Asia, essentially, that's when Buddhism completely flew. And it was at one stage, it was so big that it was absorbing Hinduism, essentially. So it would have consumed Hinduism. Everyone would have essentially become Buddhists, and they wouldn't have retained the Vedas and the Upanishads. It would have been all Buddha's philosophy, which isn't really different in a sense, but it doesn't have as much as I wouldn't say depth, but the variations as the Hinduism religions have. So without Ashoka, Ashoka would therefore then be probably one of the second most important Buddhist in Buddhism. after Buddha himself because of his influence across the continent.
Very interesting. I did not know that, but of course, there's always every religion always has a time when it spreads like wildfire, when it spreads really quickly. And
what actually happened? Yeah, I think Hinduism to manage it, what they did. I think this may be my own personal reflection as well. They made Buddha a incarnation of Vishnu. I don't think it was very clear who that incarnation should be. That was Buddha, but they made him one of the incarnations, and then he essentially. Lots of Hindus don't consider Buddha, like myself, don't really consider Buddhism as different to Hinduism, and then you don't need to convert and leave all your ideologies behind, and then slowly, I think it kind of cooled down, and it wasn't such a threat anymore.
Right. If we can find them, join them.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, there's Ashoka. I think you're just reading it there. There's lots of different Ashoka buildings, Ashoka era buildings that were sponsored by Ashoka, and they're still standing. Around that time was the most famous stupa, Sanchi Stupa, which is in near central India. This magnificent stupa, which is supposed to house some of Buddha's remains, I believe. So you'll see many Buddhists there, and and there's pillars, Ashoka's pillars all over India, very very beautifully still standing after 2,500 years. Very ornate, very beautiful.
Yeah, and apparently that palace that he built at Pataliputra, which is today Patna. I think Patna is in UP. Is that correct? I'm not sure. I don't have Google Maps open right now, but there's a Chinese writer who came 1,000 years later, and he wrote about its magnificence. His name was Fa Xian, and he said he tells us the structure was of such incredible beauty in its architecture and decorative sculpture that it could have been the work of no mortal hands. That's high praise.
Bihar, it's in, Mike, apparently. Just checked.
Bihar? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for checking that. And now it goes on. The last paragraph is a conversation again with Sri Yukteswar and Mukunda, and he talks to him like Mukunda talks to Sri Yukteswar. He says, when I ventured a few words of sympathy over his emaciated figure, my guru said gaily. So you could see that he went through an illness. He says, it has good points. I'm able to get into some small ganjis, undershirts that I haven't worn in years. So he lost some weight. He makes a humorous remark, and then Guruji says, listening to Master's jovial laugh, I remembered the words of Saint Francis de Sales. A saint that is sad is a sad saint.
Is Saint Francis de Sales a different saint than Saint Francis of Assisi?
It's a different one, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, he is.
It's a funny line, isn't it?
It is. It's also true. I think you rather see a saint that is happy. Most of the people that are spiritual that I have met over the years were pretty happy people. I imagine if I met Guruji or Jesus, they would also be pretty happy. I'm thinking.
Just looking about Francis de Sales, he served in Geneva, and he was a Catholic monk, and he was noted for his deep faith and gentle approach to religious divisions in his land. So that was around the 16th century.
That makes sense. Isn't that maybe 100 years after St. Francis of Assisi? Not that long after. Uh-oh, I'm being tested. Yeah.
It is. Oh no, St. Francis of Assisi was like the 12th century. So
Oh, okay. Not that long, not that close, 400 years. Okay. I was off by 300 years. Forgive me. All right. So that concludes chapter 21. Kind of, right?
Almost. Yes,
Almost.
it does. But I did
Mhm.
want to just talk a little bit about the pictures in this chapter, and the pictures here are actually the reason for the different prints. So depending on how old your copy of the Autobiography of a Yogi may be, there's when you open like the first few pages, you'll read two things. If you open your book, you'll see that it is probably, if you're reading a very relatively modern one, like this one, you can't see it, like this one, no, that one, they're likely to be 13th edition. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I've got one that's 13th edition, but it's a print from 2001. That was the first Autobiography Yogi that was given to me. So the 13th edition was 1998, but it was reprinted in 2001. So and then this the most current print is 2021, I believe. And the reason for the reprints, so like my original copy has actually got the different the pictures here of the presidents that are in this chapter depend on which print you have. So you don't have the most current president in the book. You only mention the most current president. So here in our book, we meant the most current print says, the current president is Brother or Swami Chidananda. And when I got my initial one, it's only got Dayamata and Rajarshi Janakananda, because Mrinalini Mata was still in her physical form. So that is the reason why SRF does, one of the reasons why SRFs do reprints to update pictures such as those, and then text as well. So my print has got a very detailed biography on Rajarshi Janakananda and Dayamata, whereas the most recent prints don't have such a comprehensive, because they had to make a space for Mrinalini Mata as well. So it's got a much more condensed biography of each of those great ones.
Interesting. All right. Should we reflect a bit on this chapter and also look ahead on the next one? I can start. After we had a chapter where they didn't go to Kashmir, I was very happy that they finally went. And we mentioned it many times that some of it reads like a tourism brochure of Kashmir, beautiful land. I would love to visit it one day. But also that story of Yukteswar getting ill, and even saying there's a chance he might leave his body here. It kind of shows that if you, even if you're a saint, if you venture out, you kind of put yourself in the crosshair of bad things that can happen to you. So that is something to maybe also a life lesson.
My pastimes, my reflections are that I love the pastimes, especially at the very start of this book when they venture out on this journey, on this trip. And, they're talking about strawberries, and because there's just, Sri Yukteswar is just throwing out prophecies about how he's going to establish, he's going to love strawberries in the future. So profound things in very minute and fun stories, which is cool, especially also about his friend smoking already, which was a cool story as well. And then suddenly Paramahansa Yogananda takes the opportunity to become a world tour guide, ranking beauty spots around the world, which I must say he must have known what was going to happen in the future, because we're all obsessed with globetrotting now, aren't we? And we would certainly take on, well, I would anyway, take on point, on note, which places I should see, because Paramahansa Yogananda has mentioned them very specifically for us to see. And then, the last half becomes exceptionally heavy, doesn't it, in terms of the healing, both through a guru's, healing you and taking your sins, to you being able to do it yourself, or parents being able to do it for you in terms of devotion. So I love that we were able to bring, or Guruji was able to bring Akbar, and we were able to bring Birbal into it, and Asoka, of course, as well. Important people in the history of the world, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you two have said most of everything, but I have one other thing that I'd like to add that I really loved about this chapter, which was the relationship between Guruji and Sri Yukteswar. In that moment when Sri Yukteswar was saying, I might leave, and Guruji's saying, well, I'm not prepared to go on without you, and if you go, then I'll die too. And that sincerity that he said that with obviously really touched God, because he saved Sri Yukteswar from having to go. So I thought that was quite a special moment, that relationship and that attunement and that love that Guruji had for his guru. It's quite inspiring to me.
Agreed. What's happening next time, Lauren?
Well, next time we are on to a new chapter, chapter 22, which is called The Heart of a Stone Image. And it's really a chapter, to me, about redemption and miracles. So I won't reveal too much, but we have Guruji's sister and her husband is not a fan of spiritual life, and he's really quite outwardly spoken about it and quite mean, and they go visit the temple, and something divine and miraculous happens there, which then changes his outlook on life, and he is redeemed. It's a really good chapter, I think, to show the possibilities that no matter what level of consciousness you're on, things can always turn a corner. That is quite inspiring.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm looking forward to that next time.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, so I think we've covered chapter 21. Looking forward to chapter 22. Thank you to the listeners. Thank you, Priya and Lauren. Jai Guru.
Thank you, Michael. Jai Guru.